What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 12 of the Cycle Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I can't believe we've made it to 12. We have one more next month in December, which will bring us to 13. So I've overachieved by one podcast, and I'm really grateful to all of you for listening. Thank you so much for your kind words, your emails, your DMs, your texts, supporting the podcast, and thanking me. Honestly, it's the bravery of all the women who have shared their stories thus far that is really helping to pay it forward. The goal of this podcast really was to bring awareness and to let you know you are not alone in this disease. Endometriosis affects 200 million people worldwide. You are not alone. There's a group of women out here to support you. If you ever need help or you feel alone, please reach out to me. You can find all of my credentials on my website, which is linked in the show notes, melissaboudreau.com, or you can find me on Instagram at endo_lady. Thank you again for listening. I hope you enjoy my talk with Nicole on today's episode. She's just begun her endo journey and she's already had one surgery, but she's been suffering for many years. Thank you again for listening. I appreciate you. Sending you love and light. And today I have a very special guest. Her name is Nicole, and we actually met via the internet. She was listening to the podcast, and it definitely changed some of her perspective as to what was going on with her. So I'm really excited to dig in to that today with her. But first off, Nicole, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Melissa. I really appreciate it. And I am so excited to be here today.
Well, we look forward to hearing about your story and your journey, and it will hopefully help some of our listeners. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? It doesn't have to be about endo, just like your life, what's going on, how old you are, anything that you feel comfortable sharing.
So currently I am in graduate school for meat science. So I'm 23 right now and a far ways from home. I'm originally from Virginia. So I just started graduate school. It's kind of been a stressful whirlwind of emotions, trying to get comfortable and settle in, but I'm super happy out here. And then kind of something with endo is that I was kind of hit with, oh, I think you have endometriosis. And that kind of started out, that's kind of how I started out my grad school experience. So from that, it's kind of been crazy and stressful, but I think I'm figuring it out and just trying to, go through life like any 23-year-old, not sure what to expect.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, you're on the right path. 23, grad school, that's all great. And sorry to hear about getting the endo diagnosis, but I'm sure, as we will discover in this podcast, that you're grateful that you did. So yes. Tell me a little bit about like your youth or like your, when you first started your period. How old were you? Do you remember?
So I was around 13 years old when I first started. I was in middle school, and of course I wasn't going to use a tampon because that was terrifying. So I used pads, and I have to say my middle school period experience was probably one of the worst for me because I would bleed through those pads instantly. And I thought it was normal, but I was just constant. I would have to leave school and pretend I was sick and have my grandma come pick me up because I would bleed through my clothes. And my mom and grandma were like, oh no, like it happens, it's okay. Just kind of keep going, like it's normal. And so I kind of finally started using tampons, and those were still, I would have a super tampon in and completely bleed through it in 30 minutes. And again, my mom's just like, that's just, it happens. It's a girl thing. Like, don't worry about it. And that's kind of what you get told going through health class too. Like, there's nothing to worry about. It's supposed to happen. You're supposed to have horrible cramps and bleed through your pants every once in a while. And so that's what I thought. And then it didn't hit me until I was 16 years old, and I will never forget this moment because it was awful. But I was playing volleyball and I had my period that day, and I was supposed to be, I was the setter, and the coach was getting ready to put me in the game, and I was so excited, and something hit me at that moment that I could not stand up. I was doubled over, sitting in a chair, and they're like, "What's wrong?" I'm like, "I don't know. I feel like someone's stabbing me." And I didn't know what was happening to me, especially as a 16-year-old. That stuff kind of freaks you out. And so I couldn't be put in the game, and everyone thought it was, I was told, I was examined by the health person that was there, and I was told that it was just a muscle spasm, or I pulled a muscle in my abdomen. But years later, finding out after I had another one of those experiences and passed out, it was most likely endometriosis, or an ovarian cyst that had burst.
So from 13, I'm sorry you went through that first off, but from 13 to 16, besides the heavy bleeding, were you doubled over in cramps every time you had your period? Or was it more just like, I had cramps, they were like, they were livable except for those really awful experiences, and then very heavy periods?
So when I first started out, it was cramps that were, I didn't want to go to school in the morning because they would be so painful, but I would just take ibuprofen and just kind of go on my way. And I at the time, I didn't think they were that bad. But now looking back, I'm like, yeah, they were pretty unbearable, but I was just going through it because I didn't think I thought everyone went through it like that, and I thought it was normal to want to pass out or just feel awful and not want to do anything that day. So the severe pain, though, did not start until I was 16 when I first had that.
Right. Like, you probably had like a cyst rupture or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you had, I mean, from the day one, painful cramps were definitely a symptom. And you, like very many other women that I've talked to, and myself personally, also, I thought it was normal. I thought like rocking back and forth on the couch, like almost vomiting and passing out was normal. And because my grandma told me it was normal too. And they didn't know that it wasn't. And we just had quote unquote painful periods. So if there's any parents listening, that's definitely a first sign to look for, is painful periods in the beginning. But I've also talked to some parents that their daughters have different symptoms, and the heavy bleeding is one, but they may not have super painful cramps. So that's why I was really interested to hear about your, young symptoms. So then, okay, so now you're 16, you had this experience. At that point, were you like, this doesn't make sense? Like, I did not pull a muscle. Like, this is not a pulled muscle.
Yes. So I was like, okay, this was really weird. Like, my abdomen was like sore for a little bit, which with an ovarian cyst, I found out, that can happen. And then a couple years later, I had another one, probably when I was 17 or 18. And then this one, actually, I was home alone, and I was like, whoa, what is happening to my body? I ended up getting really hot. I was very nauseous. And then I filled the tub a little bit up with some cold water and just laid there, and I ended up passing out, which it's awful because I wasn't planning on passing out in the bathtub, but it happened, and I woke up and I was like, oh my goodness. And I mentioned it to my mom, but it was just kind of a freak thing that happened, and I'm like, this is not normal. this is not okay. And so I started kind of doing my own research, and I decided, let's try the birth control pill, let's try something else. So that's when I went to the gynecologist. So I actually didn't go to the gynecologist until I was 21.
Okay.
And looking back, I wish I would have gone when I was 16. And I would tell anyone to, don't, I know some parents, don't want to think about that or don't want to, get their daughters on birth control. But looking back, I would definitely have wanted that, because maybe I would have found out earlier, or maybe I could have, understood my disease better.
So when you had those two terrible incidents, were you on your period when those happened?
Yes. So it was about it would either be like the week before my period. Usually that's when they happened. So like it would happen and then I would have my period afterwards.
Got it.
Which was really scary because I didn't know what was happening to my body.
Right. Because it didn't seem relatable as well if it's the week before. Okay. Yeah. So then you said you started doing research. Did endometriosis come up in your research? And did you feel like, I think I have this, or what did you find?
The interesting thing is, when I was searching, endometriosis did not come up very much, which I just believe that's because there's not much research done on it. I think there should be. And so mainly it was ovarian cyst, or the thing that comes up is pregnancy. And of course, as that, you're when that comes up as a 17-year-old, that terrifies you.
Sure.
So I was like, oh my goodness, like what's happening? And so finally when I decided to go to the gynecologist, I went and I mentioned, I had these experiences. My periods were 7 days long. They were random. They wouldn't come at the same time. And it was heavy bleeding throughout. And I was like, could this be, because I started looking, when I started college, I realized there was some women around me that had PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I thought, maybe this is what I have. My answer, because nothing else was like just the random ovarian cysts. I thought something else was wrong. And so I mentioned it to my gynecologist. I said, could it be something like PCOS or endometriosis? And this is the first time I have ever heard that word, is while looking up PCOS. And so I mentioned it and I said, is there any way you can look at this or tell? And so they're like, oh, we'll do an ultrasound and that will tell us if you have either one. And so I was like, this is awesome. I'm going to find out. Well, they did an ultrasound. They're like, no, we don't see anything. And I'm like, okay. And then come to find out all these years later, now that I understand it and have been diagnosed with a laparoscopic surgery, I'm like, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know.
They didn't know, which is one of the biggest problems in this community, but also things don't show up on ultrasound unless you have a large cyst or something like that. And yeah, that's unfortunate. So at that they don't know, and that's a whole bigger discussion. But at that time, did you go on birth control?
At that time, yes. I did start birth control, and it helped as far as not having my periods 7 days, but it did not help with the bleeding. It did not help with the cramps. But I was like, oh, this is normal. Everyone says, they all tell you like, oh, it affects every woman's body differently. So I didn't think anything of it. But then the cramps started getting worse. And my mom, I was telling her about it one time, and she said, you're not supposed to be having these symptoms on birth control. Like, you need to, find another one. So then, of course, I went back to the gynecologist, and I was put throughout from 21 to up to 22, 23, I was put on 3, 4 different types of birth control. And looking back, I'm like, after the second or third one, I probably should have asked, like, okay, so something, up, but because that's a lot.
Yeah.
And once I went back again this past August, I told my gynecologist, this birth control really isn't working. I'm still having these symptoms. And he started to ask me, okay, what are your symptoms? And I was like, I'm having really bad abdominal cramping, and I'm getting pain the week before my period as well as the week of my period. And then he kind of thought, well, this really sounds like endometriosis. And I was like, really? Because I told you all this when I was 18.
Right.
So I was
right.
At that moment I got very, very frustrated. But I can tell the story of how if you would like, I can start talking about what happened over the summer and how I kind of found you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear that. And just to kind of wrap up the doctors and everything and the birth control and all that. I mean, what you experienced is totally normal. Most women with endo go through multiple pills, just for the audience listening, and they go through multiple, different types, and it doesn't work. And really, for some women, it can help. It can reduce the pain. It can reduce the bleeding, but depending on your level of endometriosis, it may not help. So just for the community listening, just as an FYI. And then Nicole, really quick, did your mom or grandma or aunts or uncles or anyone in your family, when you were going through all this, ever mention that they had something similar? Or
my mom always mentioned that she said, oh, I bled heavy too. Like, I understand, like, I bleed heavy on my first 3 days, but it never was, I don't think they ever mentioned how the
painful
cramps were so, bad that they just kind of doubled you over, or pain.
Right.
I didn't get a chance. I did not talk to my grandmothers about it, because they passed away when I was younger. So I never got to ask them that, but I wish I could, because, maybe, that could have been, something that they had. But I did, realize, I did some digging in my family, and my, grandmother's sister has endometriosis really bad. So it's on one side of the family that I found out. I don't know if it's genetic, but I just thought that was I was like, oh, that's, really interesting to find out that they do on that side.
Right. And I don't think anyone really knows through the research yet if it is genetic, but I like to ask that question because I do find it interesting that it seems like most women, someone in their family they know also had it, but it's such a common disease too. So anyway, just trying to figure that all out. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is that, you're 23, I'm 40, and I went through very similar experiences, 20 years ago when I was on a similar journey as you. And to me, it's disappointing to hear this because I feel like we've come so far in the community and the awareness. And clearly, your story goes to show it happened maybe a little bit faster that you got notified that you might have this disease, but not really. And so, I mean, that's really one of the goals of this podcast. So yeah, I'd love to hear about, so you're on birth control. He says you may have endometriosis. I assume at this time you start to get crazy and do some research.
I started to get crazy and do some research. And at that time, he also suggested I get off birth control and go on the IUD. And so that's currently what I have now. So over the summer, a little kind of what happened over the summer which is how I found you. It hit me around the middle of the summer, and I, for some reason, could not eat anything. Every time I ate something, my body would be nauseous, or I would have diarrhea. And I had no idea what was wrong with me. And I was going to all these doctors and they're like, oh, it's IBS, it's IBS. And I'm like, I know my body. This is not IBS. And so I was very annoyed because I was living off broth and crackers and soup for 2 months and nothing was helping, and no one could figure out why. And I was going to get a endoscope put down my throat to look into my stomach because I didn't know if it was like a GI issue, and I never connected it that it could potentially be, from endometriosis. And this was before the doctor had diagnosed me with it. But that is when, so after that issue, that's when I went to the gynecologist, told him all these problems, and he mentioned it. And then also, I started doing my digging, and that's when I came across your podcast because I was like, I need any information I can get on this. And I remember I downloaded all the podcasts to like listen to on the plane, and I came across yours about your story. And I listened to it, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I feel like my head just exploded because I realized that my GI problems I believe that they are caused by endometriosis. And so after I realized that, I was like, Mom, I need to get a new gynecologist. Like, I found this lady and I think I have what she has, and I cannot believe it, but I don't know why the doctors didn't put two and together. Like, these GI problems can be from, this disease. And it was like a light bulb went off, and I was so excited because I was figuring out what was happening to my body when many other doctors couldn't. And then that's when I got in touch with you, and ever since then everything has changed, and I'm so happy and thankful for that, because if I didn't find your podcast, I think I would still be so lost and not have connected the two, because the doctors couldn't even have connected them. So.
Well, that is all very nice. I'm going to cry listening to you say all that. But I mean, it's part of the reason why I do this is because very similar story to yours, so sick and nobody knew what was wrong with me. And I was going to all the GI doctors and they diagnosed me with IBS too. And I was so frustrated. And for anyone listening to this podcast, like, your body. And that's why, Nicole, I feel like everything's changed for you as well, is because you knew something else was wrong. And that's how I felt too. And I was like, these doctors are looking at me like I'm crazy, but I know I'm not. Like, I know something is wrong. And that's such a huge part of, unfortunately, because there's so little awareness about this disease and education, we have to continue to advocate for ourselves and keep trying to find a doctor that will actually listen to us and that understands the disease.
Yes, I totally agree.
What happens now? So you and I connected, and just so the audience knows, you can reach out to me anytime. Everything's linked in this podcast and how to reach out to me. I'm not a doctor, but I've been through a lot. So I have a little bit of experience as to what to do. So what were your next steps? Now you're like, okay, this is all endo related, I think. Now, what do you do?
So I take myself to a gynecologist here where I'm at school, because that doctor was in Virginia, which was, hard with traveling. And so I found a gynecologist out here. They were not specialized in endometriosis, but at this point, I was so desperate to find answers, and I was in so much pain because the pain was starting to happen every day. And I knew I was just kind of going crazy. And so I found a gynecologist and I said, you're going to do a laparoscopic surgery on me. And I begged him. I was like, this is the reason why I brought all my papers with me. And I highlighted them. And I said, I think I have endometriosis. This is why, and I need you to do this to help me. And he agreed and said, that, and I had done some, after talking to you and doing some research, I knew that doing the burning, the ablation,
Mm-hmm.
was something I didn't want him to do. And so I told him, please cut it out if you can. I don't want you to do ablation. And he said, it's the same thing. And I was like,
Oh boy.
actually,
Oh boy.
yeah. So I said, actually, it's not, because it's like a weed. And, if you just burn the top of the weed, the roots are still there. And I said, please cut it out. And I said, promise me you'll cut it out if you can. He's like, okay, but it's, and he brushed it off. And he was like, this isn't, thing you need to worry about. Like, this isn't not. And so after that, I was probably like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but I was still, so desperate to find answers. And so I had my laparoscopic surgery in September, and they did indeed find endometriosis, and it was on the back side of my uterus, and it was between stage 1 and stage 2, he said, and he indeed did do ablation and burned it. And I wish I could show you the pictures of what he did to my uterus, because it looks horrifying because it's just burned. But, and I asked him, I'm like, why didn't you cut it out? And he's like, because of where the location was, I couldn't do that. I didn't want to mess with anything down there. Me taking that as I'm not qualified, like I don't have enough knowledge,
and that's respectable.
of this disease.
I mean, that's respectable, as you would rather him not do
exactly.
something he's not skilled to do, and
exactly.
You got a diagnosis, which is good.
So I realized, I thinking back, I'm like, okay, if he didn't think he could do it, I'm glad he did not, because that could have been a whole nother road that would have been awful to go down. And so currently, after having that, I'm still having pain. It's with mainly what I eat now, and it's at the end of the day, and it's, I think, from inflammation. So I am carrying around my medicine with me. I am carrying around a portable heating pad that I can strap around my body, because I don't know when it's going to hit me, and I don't know when the pain will. It can be any time, which I'm sure it can come at any time for me. And so I told this doctor who did the surgery about it, and he put me on birth control. So I am on the IUD as well as birth control. Didn't even know you could do, to kind of just not let me have a period at all. I'm still having pain with that. So I decided to go on to Nancy's Nook on Facebook that you informed me about, which I am forever grateful, because that is the best place to find information. And I actually have an appointment, I think November, this coming up Friday, with a Dr. Heegard in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he is a specialist in endometriosis. And so I'm going to take that step. And if I do ever need to have a surgery again, which could be possible in a year or whenever, I'm going to have that trained professional do that. And I am so excited to be taken care of.
Yes, good.
It's so nice.
How are you feeling after the surgery? I mean, I guess you're on birth control and the IUD, so you're not having a period, but how are your bowel symptoms?
They are kind of all over the place.
Okay.
It depends on what I eat. I have to stay away from dairy right now, and that still wasn't helping. I was still getting really bad inflammation in the evenings, and I started to stay away from gluten. So that's my thing now. I'm kind of trying to back off from gluten as well. I think it has been helping. I really do. But it's very odd because sometimes, even though I'm on the birth control and the IUD, I'll still spot a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
that will cause pain.
Right.
And so whenever I'm on the pills and I skip my sugar pills, but because my period is supposed to come that week or be that week, my
Mm-hmm.
body, for some reason, just goes into pain.
Yeah.
And
Because it's still cycling. Your body
yes,
is
it's still
still,
cycling.
yeah, it's
So,
still cycling. And inflammation, you're very right about inflammation. And this disease just feeds on
mm-hmm.
inflammation. And if you overdo it, even just with exercise, or you eat something that could trigger it, it's almost like a chess game. It's
It
like you're
is.
just moving
Mm-hmm.
pieces to figure out what works best for you, because it's different. I could tell you that I know people that eat gluten and they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
Eat it and they literally are in so much more pain. So it is a chess game, and I recommend everyone always just keeping, like, I keep a pain diary, and I used to keep a food journal, but I've cut so much food out that I don't even keep one anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because I barely eat any
Yeah.
inflammatory foods anymore. But that's great. I mean, everything you've done and learned, for being 23, this is huge. And that you'll have an excision surgeon in your pocket if you
Yeah.
need it is great. And for everyone who's listening, I know that Nicole mentioned Nancy's Nook, which is a great resource on Facebook that has a ton of doctors. There's also another one called Endometriosis, which lists a bunch of doctors. I would say Nancy's Nook can be a little bit political. So I would suggest looking at doctors on both, because my doctor is not listed on Nancy's Nook, and I don't know why. Some drama politics that I don't want to get into or don't even want to know about. But just for people who are listening, there's those two groups where women have said these doctors are skilled in endometriosis, and excision isn't, a cure, just so everybody knows, but it can really, really help cut the disease out and give a lot of pain relief, especially at stage 1, 2, 3. I do think that you can feel good for 9, 10,
Mm-hmm.
20 years. So I'm really happy to hear all of that. And I'm sorry to hear that, even with the birth control and the IUD, you're still having all of, that pain. Definitely make sure you tell the specialist that.
Yeah.
And my guess is he may switch up what you're on, because, endo's an estrogen dominant disease. And I don't know what kind of birth control you're on, but it could be fueling some of your pain.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, thank you for sharing all of that. I'm excited to hear how much progress you've made quickly in getting the right care that you deserve.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, it's all because of you.
Well,
Just saying, it's all, I mean, for everyone listening, I could not have done it without Melissa, because of I never expected to get a response when I contacted her, and the fact that she contacted me, I think the next day, and asked if we could chat, I was like, oh my gosh, what, I'm talking to a celebrity, like an advocate for this disease that, is awful. And so I am so blessed. And, I was like telling my mom, I'm like, Mom, you have to listen to this lady that I met. Like, she's awesome. And so my mom is so happy that I, have you as a supporter, because with endometriosis, it is so hard to find that support. And you really have to be your own advocate when going to doctors.
well, everyone, I did not pay Nicole to say all of those nice things, just so you know. But honestly, that really means a lot to me. And that's the whole point of doing this podcast. I don't put ads in here. I don't do any of that. This is just what I consider quote unquote volunteer work, because I really don't want people to suffer as long as I have. And if I can get on the phone with someone or send an email or something to cut your research time or, suffering in half, that's honestly just my life goal. This is what I do on the side. And I know it probably seems, some people just think it's crazy, but what you just said is the whole reason why I do this. So thank you for saying that. I really, really appreciate it. It means so much to me, and it helps fuel me to keep doing all of this work on the side to get the awareness out there, because it's so important.
Yes.
So my question, do you have anything that you want to recommend to the listeners? I know you've told a lot of what you've done, but you've made some drastic changes from literally summer, and it's November. So in a
Yes.
few months, is there anything for the listeners that might be where you were, to just give them a tip?
I would say just keep doing your research. I think that is number one. And know your research and, make sure it's from a credible source. But knowing that information, because some of the doctors will not know any of that, just knowing that information and being your own advocate, and don't let people tell you that your pain don't let them try to diminish it. Don't let them take that away from you, because your pain is real and you're not sensitive, and they're not living your life every day and having to go through that. So don't let anyone degrade your pain. That's what I would say. That's kind of been my hardest thing. Just don't let anyone take that away from you, because it's your life and you're going through it.
I think that's a great piece of advice, and I really think that you're strong and you're a warrior, and it's very important. It's true. It's very hard when people don't understand what you're going through, and something that I always say is nobody will get it until they get it.
Yep.
And
I totally
we all have,
agree.
I mean, it's true, and you don't want anyone to have this disease, but our friends, our family, our loved ones, they only see probably 50% of the pain that we're going through. I know I hide it all the time, even to my husband. He doesn't know the level that I'm at. And he knows that if I'm even showing it or expressing it, that it's got to be pretty bad. But we are the only ones who really understand how bad it is. And that's why I try to talk about it too. And it's hard and embarrassing for me still as a business professional to be at work and to have to explain I don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's, those people will never understand. And that's why we have to keep talking about it. And I think what you said, Nicole, is so key. You know yourself the best. You know your body the best. And if people are telling you that you're crazy, or it's all in your head, or they don't think it's as serious as it is, you have to either A, tell them, or just ignore what they're saying, because you know your body the best.
Yeah, it's so important. More than you realize.
It is. It's and for your mental health too,
Exactly.
because I started second guessing myself originally too. Like, oh my gosh, I must just have this low pain tolerance. And I actually was told by many of my doctors that I have one of the highest pain tolerances out there. And many women with endo, I've heard the same thing, because we're so used to just living in it,
Mm-hmm.
that other people couldn't survive this pain that we're used to living in every day.
Yeah. Wow.
So just keep fighting and doing all the things, and, stretching helps, and foam rolling, which I made a video on, and things like that. But, taking care of yourself and keep fighting are the key things.
Yes, I totally
that's good.
agree.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up this podcast?
I would just like to say thank you so much for having me on here. I never thought I would be on a podcast telling my story, but you made that possible. So this is really great. And just, yeah, I'm so glad I found you and I found the podcast.
Well,
and it makes the disease, bearable.
Yeah. Yep. Anyone who's listening, you are not alone. There's 176 million, probably 200 million women that have this disease. 100 million of them are in the US. So find those communities, find your support system. Even if it's one other girl that has endo, she will get you, she will be there for you. And I think that the community is so important when you have this disease, and having someone to reach out to and talk to. And I'm really grateful that I met Nicole too. And I hope we get to meet in person one day, because you helped reassure all of the hard work that I do behind closed doors that people don't know about. You reassured to me that what I'm doing is right.
Oh,
So thank you so much for coming on today. And I will be thinking of you during your appointment on Friday. So
thank you.
maybe
Thank
we'll
you
have
so
you back
much.
on to keep us updated.
I know. It would be great.
All right. Well, wonderful. You have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you, Melissa.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to episode 12. I hope it brought you value. And I did not ask Nicole to say all of those nice things, though it meant so much to me. You know, you never know if you're making impact, and to hear stories that you're making a difference is all that matters. And it's not even about me. It's about raising awareness and getting women treatment sooner that are suffering from endometriosis. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Look for one more episode in December. And next year, my goal is to hopefully do 2 podcasts a month. So if you're interested in being on the podcast, please go to my website and you can reach out to me via email or you can DM me. Pretty much booked through March so far, but I'd love to have you on if you want to tell your story or if you have something helpful that could help women with endometriosis. I have a few interesting podcasts coming up next year. So more to come on that. Thank you again so much for listening. And if this podcast does bring you value, please share it with your friends and or family if you have endometriosis. I'd love your feedback. If there's a topic you'd want me to cover, you can also send me that in email or via DM on Instagram. And also, if you are up for it, no pressure, if you rate us on Apple Podcasts, I would really appreciate that. That helps us get more reach and more awareness. Okay, I've asked enough of you. Thank you again for listening. Have a wonderful day. Sending you pain-free vibes.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.